Hi gang, so in my last video I talked about AWS Simple Queue service and I showed an example of how to send events into queue and how to process them. Now in this video I wanted to talk about dead letter queue, and when it comes to production apps the dead letter queue is a very important concept which goes hand in hand with SQS. So let's get dive into it. So in a simple architecture, decoupled architecture, we have producers who are like our creating events or want something to be processed by a different microservice. And what they do is they send events to simple queue service. So they send events to the queue, and in turn the consumers they receive messages from queue, so they keep polling the queue and they receive the messages. Once they receive the messages, they process the message, and to process the message they might be interacting with their own dependencies like databases, cache, or anything like that, or other microservices. And in turn, once they're done with processing the message or done the action required for that particular message, they send the delete message instructions to the queue, and the queue deletes that message. So this is the ideal flow which happens. But in real world, it may happen that the queue any of the flow or any of the process breaks. So for example, in this case, let's say while consumer is processing the message, there's an issue in the one of the data dependencies, like one of the dependencies throws error saying that we cannot process the message or something like that. So in turn, consumer won't send the delete message to the queue. Now, what happens in this case, as we spoke about in last video about visibility timeout. So whenever we read message from the queue, we have a visibility timeout started. And in that visibility timeout for those pollings, the message won't be visible in the queue. But once that is done, and once the visibility timeout has expired and the message is not deleted from the queue still, it will be available again in the queue. So in the next polling, the message would be available. Now, it may happen that some cases the message is actually a bad message, like it cannot be processed. For example, you're trying to update a record of the user who doesn't exist in database anymore, so that user has deleted all its data and there's an event to update the username or something like that of the data. So every time you try to update, the database or the microservices handling the users would throw an error that user doesn't exist and cannot process the data. What SQS does is, as per our configured redrive policy, after an X number the message was received or delivered, but it was not deleted, it will move the message into dead letter queue so that SQS doesn't get backed out, and like a lot of messages in the queue stay and don't get deleted and impacting the performance of the application. Now, once the message has been deleted to the dead letter queue, what are we supposed to do as an app developer? There are a few things we can do. First is we can pull the messages from the dead letter queue to identify what's the exact error we are getting, or check out the logs. The second thing we can do is go and see the message itself, like what's there in the message, and look at the investigate manually, like why it got errored and if it was right or wrong, and thus we can investigate without impacting the performance of the application, which is removing the messages from the queue so that the other good events that we come, those gets processed by consumers. So that is the concept of dead letter queue in AWS. So now next we will go and create an queue and also the corresponding dead letter queue, and see a live example how exactly it works and how the events are moved. Okay, now let's look at implementing a dead letter queue and SQS in AWS console itself. So for that, first we'll log in. So now that we are logged in, we can choose the region we like. I'm working on my region, AP Southeast 2. You can choose the region closest to you. Now, once you're there, let's go to let's in the search bar, let's search simple queue service. So once it's up, let's click there. It will show simple queue service. It will give you a create queue button, so you can go through this way or you can go to queues and it will list your queues. Since we don't have any right now, it doesn't show up. Let's go ahead and create the queue. So we'll create the first queue and I'm going with standard queue. So, and now in dead letter queue again we'll have something like visibility timeout, delivery delay, retrieve message wait time, message retention period, and maximum message size. So these are all standard. I'll leave them for dead letter queue, and come back. Now the other important part is access policy. So in this case, right now, if we look at the policy right on the which is created on the right side, so it gives my account, which is this AWS ARN, all access to SQS, and all SQS actions can be done on this queue, on this resource. So ARN is Amazon resource number. So we do this. We'll leave this as is. So we have all the access. Redrive allow policy. Leave it as is. Dead letter queue as is. So this is our dead letter queue, but we'll leave it as is. And uh, let's create the queue. Now that this queue is created, let's create our queue. So we'll do my queue. So this will be our main queue in which messages go. Just for the tutorial to make it faster, I'll make visibility timeout as 3 seconds, and retention period that, delivery this. All good, looks good. Again, access policy. My account will have all permission to all SQS actions on this resource. So dead letter queue is enabled. So we'll make it like, okay, so for us this should be, for this queue this should be the dead letter queue, and we'll make dead letter queue maximum retries. Let's set maximum retry as 2. So if for 2 times we read a message but we don't delete it, it will be moved to the dead letter queue, which is my DLQ. I'll create the queue. After creating the queue, I come back to my dead letter queue, and sorry, I go to our queue and look at the dead letter queue. So this is the dead letter queue created. And last thing, letter queue, all looks good. Allow redrive policy and send undelivered message to a dead letter queue enabled. Sorry, not this one. This one, allow redrive policy. Yeah, so we'll give like which policy, which queue can make this, use this as dead letter queue. So so it says retry allow policy, identify which source queue can use this queue as the dead letter queue. So I'll just do, rather than allow all, I'll do by queue, and I'll select the my queue. So that can use it as dead letter queue. So now I come back, I refresh, the 2 queues are created, and now let's move to our editor and look at the changes. Now that we have created the queues, let's go ahead and send some events and look at how it functions when we process the events or delete them. So this is the code base from my previous tutorial where we saw how to start the SQS queue with local stack and send events. There are a couple of modifications which I've done to this queue. So with this code, so the first one is we can still see we are taking credentials and we are setting the AWS SDK using these credentials. I'll show you how to get these credentials from AWS console. The next one, in send messages, you select the region and you can go to the whichever AWS region in which you created the queue. The next is I'm sending 100 events, so looping through 100, and in the message I'm sending an ID and a message. I'll show you why I'm sending, but for now we are sending that, and then we send the messages like 100 messages with ID. Now how to get the credentials? So to get the credentials, let's come back to our AWS console. Let's go to this service called IAM. Open IAM. So once it's open, I'll make some changes, but users. So this is my user for when I created the permissions and everything. I'll come here and this access key. So this is the access key you need to create. So I'll just click on this and I'll deactivate this one. This is pretty old one, not being used. So deactivate, and create a new one. Let me just see. So I'll just go and generate some credentials so we can see access key. So this is the one which is expired. So I think I need to delete it. I need to copy the entire thing. So let's copy this thing, come here and delete it. So once it's deleted, let's create a new access key. So this is the access key. Let's copy that, come to our code, and in our environment, let's copy the key ID and then the access key. Let's copy that and paste it. Now that's copied. So our AWS client would be set. Let's come back here and run this. So in the last tutorial, we set up saying send message. So let's do yarn send message. Failed. Uh, okay, the queue I didn't. So okay, so we need to also send the queue URL. I didn't copy the queue URL. So let's go to our SQS service again. And this is our queue. So let's copy the queue URL, paste it here, and now it should run again. It's running. So it's running. The messages are sent. To confirm, let's come back to this queue and click send and receive message, and then poll for messages. So when I poll, it pulls like 10 messages because that's my poll settings. Get 10 maximum 10 messages. Now if I open one of them, I can see message ID 1, message 2, message 3. Cool. Now that this is sent, so the messages are in the queue. Let's go to our receive message and process the messages. So this is our process message, and we'll just add the queue URL here, the queue that we are interacting with. Let's close this. And in here, what we are going to do in this what we are doing, we have a timeout and we sleep for we do have a continuous loop, and we in between each loop we sleep for 100 milliseconds before uh, polling the queue again to get more messages. Now once we get the messages, this was the code to actually delete the message, but in this case I don't want to delete some of the messages. I want them to go to delete a queue as to discuss. So what we are going to do is we'll put a logic saying if the message ID is odd, don't delete them, and delete them if they're even. So get the messages here, messages, I get the message here, and what I'll do is if message.id, sorry, a message.body dot I think I need to parse it. Yeah, let's do it this way. Constant message body equals json dot parse message dot body. Once we have that, then if message body dot id is 2, modulus 2 is not equal to 0, which means it's an odd number, we'll just return. And in case it's not, then we'll delete the message and we will take the deleted data and log it. So, or rather we'll log the message body, so the message got deleted, so we can just delete this message body, which means we'll delete all the even messages. This looks good, and let's go ahead and delete them. This will take some time since there are total 100 messages, so I'm just going to run this command and process message. Let's sit back and wait. So it's deleting right now. You You can say when deleted, whenever it said deleted, it was all even numbers. So we are only deleting the even numbers. I'll just put this again just to see if you are still reading the messages or getting the messages. Okay, I think it's done. So when we come back here to my queue again, let's go to send and receive message. Let's poll for messages. Okay, now on polling, we see still polling, but by this time it should have got, but we can wait for complete. But we can see there are no messages being responded. So there are no messages being returned, which means this queue is empty now. So which means either the messages in this queue got deleted, processed, or they failed and then they move to dead letter queue. We'll go and check the dead letter queue also. So once this is done, 100% no messages found. Now let's go to queues and our dead letter queue. Send and receive message. Let's poll for messages. Now we see there are messages in there. There are total 77 messages available. Uh, so they are all odd ones. Cool. So now the messages are there. So let's go ahead and change one thing in our code. Let's stop it and let's poll the messages from dead letter queue. So I'll delete the code to actually delete it. So message body, let's delete this code to actually delete it, and let's read the dead letter queue. So I'll copy the queue URL and my dead letter queue, and let's see how the queue looks. So now if I process it, cool, now that's done. So we can see all the messages with odd numbers are here. So that's exactly how it works. And there are few messages which got repeated because as we already saw that since we use a standard queue, there is a possibility that events might get repeated. And if you don't want that, we should use first in first out queue. But that's exactly how dead letter queue works. Now we can look at the messages, we can identify, okay, what's the code. So from here we can see it's all odd, and then we can come and see the code and identify, okay, it's the odd number, odd messages with odd ID are not being processed and there's something wrong there. So that's how dead letter queue works, and also an example of SQS, how to set it up in console with dead letter queue and how to use it in your. Now that we have seen SQSQ, please go ahead and implement them. Keep care of the policies and everything. And something you might see an eyebrow that I showed my access key and access key ID and access pass secret. I'll just go ahead and delete it so that it doesn't get abused or reused. In case if you ever lose it, so just go to IAM, users. That was me. I come to my security credentials, my access key, and delete. Oh, I have to copy the whole thing. First deactivate and then delete. Same for the other one. Come here, delete. First deactivate, then hit this. And now if I go back to my code and I try to process a message, oh, that's strange. I think it takes some time to take action because I have deleted it. Now let's try to process message. So now the security token included in the request is invalid because it got deleted. So that's how we set up SQS, dead letter queue, and process messages, send messages. If you have any questions regarding SQS or dead letter queue, please let me know in comments. I'm more than happy to actually answer them and interact with you. And if you have any topic in mind that you think I should cover next, do let me know in comments. Thank you so much. Have a great day.